Welcome our next guest, please.
We've got Pati Adams with us, P-A-T-I, Pati Adams with us, who has an amazing story to tell of this. This is a pro-life story in the deepest sense of the word, and we thought that our listeners here on today's issues needed to hear her story, so we wanted to welcome Pati Adams to today's issues. Pati, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay.
Before I do anything else, I want you to give us your website, because I have a feeling as you begin to unfold your story, some of our listeners are going to want to find your website. So tell us where people can find you on the internet.
Okay, it is www.patiadams.com, and it's spelled PATIADAMS.com.
Now, you've got quite a story. I'm looking at it right now on the internet, called You Are Not Alone, and it says, subtitled underneath it, Pati Adams' Story of Hope and Salvation. This directly relates to the question of abortion and why we stand for life here at American Family Radio. So, Pati, why don't you just start in and tell us about yourself, your background, and your whole interest in the abortion question.
All right, well, I'm from Connecticut. I was born and raised in Connecticut. Had a happy familyhood with my dad, my brother, my two brothers, and everything. I found my Prince Charming back in 1972. We got married in 73, and we had our first son, Jeff, in 1974. And then I found myself in a crisis because I found myself pregnant again. I was happy, but financially we weren't able to do a lot of things and have another child. And I was a young girl. I didn't know anything about abortion or anything, so I went back to the doctor, and he told me, and this is my education on abortion, in 15 minutes you'll be back to normal. That was my education. He didn't tell me anything else. I was awake through the whole thing, no medication, no nothing. After that, I kind of just went into seclusion. I was very suicidal. I started drinking, taking drugs, and my husband went to hug me when I came out of the hospital because he took me there for the abortion. And I didn't want him to touch me. If I told Jeff, I think it was a couple months ago or maybe even a year ago, that if I had a gun, I would have shot him. I was so distraught. I didn't understand what happened to me because nobody explained to me the procedures. Then our life seemed to get back kind of normal, I think, and then we had our other son, Michael Adams. And then after that, I don't know what happened. I ended up with 2 more abortions. I had medical problems with the abortions, and basically I had to go back in and endure 2 more abortions because they left fetal parts inside. And that's when I started rocking into drugs.
Pati, could I interrupt you just for a second? Go back and just repeat the sentence that you just said. They left fetal parts inside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what they called was medical, it was scarring tissue. That's what the medical term was, scarring tissue. And so, being a young girl, I didn't know. So, because I was bleeding a lot, I went back to the doctors and went back into the hospital. And that's basically, from my understanding now, after being in the pro-life movement for so long, that's what it was. It was fetal parts that were still inside me. And that's what was making me bleed. So that just kind of rocketed me into the drugs and the alcohol and suicidal thoughts and jumping from job to job to job. And I kicked my husband out. We split up about 3 times, and then I kicked him out, and I tried to file for divorce. And about a week before the divorce was final, we got back together. Now, this was all before God. Neither of us had God in our life. And he got into the hardcore biker lifestyle while we were split up, and then when we got back together, I just kind of joined his lifestyle, and I thought it was great because it was just sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and I thought, why not? But after we realized that we were going down the wrong path and our kids were going down the wrong path, we moved from Connecticut to Florida the first time, and then on January 20th, 1991, after we had put our son in a drug rehab, I met the foundation of my life. It was Jesus Christ.
How did that happen, Pati?
That happened. That was kind of funny. That after we put our son Jeff in a drug rehab, actually the whole family had to go through the whole program. It was everybody was dysfunctional, and there was another couple in there that had put their son in a drug rehab, and they gave my husband a tape of a Baptist preacher, because one night after the rehab on Friday nights, we would all go out for pie and coffee, and my husband Jeff had said something to Walt about, wow, it's almost like going to church, we're singing and all that stuff. So he, as being a good Baptist, he gave my husband the tape, and it sat on his dresser for a while, and then one night I just saw it sitting there, and I'm like, what the heck is this? Let me figure out what this is. So I kind of half listened to it. And then on the way home that night from a meeting, and we were living in Fort Myers, is that I realized I heard the pastor on the tape saying, here I am, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hear my voice. And I pulled my car on the side of the road on January 20th, 1991 at 9:15 on McGregor Boulevard, and I just white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and I trusted Christ as my Savior. I needed him so desperately because my life was going down the tube fast. And so from that point, then a week later, my husband and we went to church, and Walt said if we go to church with them, they'll buy breakfast. Well, my husband doesn't miss many meals, especially free ones.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to church, and then he trusted Christ that week. And then years later, my two sons did also. And then my husband got a job with the railroad, which ended up to Chicago, and I ended up working at a pregnancy center, which I kind of put my feet down on. I didn't want to go into a pregnancy center because I didn't know how to talk to women about being pregnant. I didn't want to talk to anybody about being pregnant, and I sure didn't want to talk to anybody about what I did, about the abortions. But God had another story. God had something else for me. So when I was in that center in Chicago, being on staff, if you had an abortion, you had to go through a Hope and Healing program, which I did. And that just totally just rocketed me into another set in my life that was just unbelievable. I realized that the healing that God still wanted to reveal to me and the restoration. And from that point, I was able to talk to women at the center in Chicago. And the biggest thing that really got me when I was in Chicago, if I have time, I had a client that I had a client that came in. She was late for appointment. She was coming in for diapers and stuff. So one of my volunteers took her into the center, into the room. And I always tell the girls if anybody's had an abortion and they need some help to talk to, to come and get me. Well, Lil came and got me, and when it came into the room, the girl had a little girl. She was really cute. The little baby was about maybe 7, 8 months old, maybe 6, 7, 8 months old. And I did something I never did. I asked her, can I hold your baby? And she said, sure. So I'm sitting there, and I'm talking to the client about my past abortion. She reached over, grabbed my arm, and she said, Patty, do you not recognize me? I said, I am so sorry. I said, we see 150 clients a month. I don't, I'm sorry, So she said, well, I was in your office 18 months ago with my boyfriend, and you told me about your 3 abortions. And then with her tears in her eyes, she looked at me and looked at that child that was holding in my lap. And these were her exact words to me. She said, Patty, you are holding my abortion in your arms. And I started crying. The client was crying. My volunteer was crying. But the baby was smiling at me as if to say, thank you, you saved my life. That was one of the best days of my life working at the crisis center. And another story that got me to go where I am now is I had a client. She was 15 years old. She was happy she was pregnant. We talked about parenting and adoption and stuff, and she said, no, her mom and her grandma was going to take care of her. So we did parenting classes for a few months, and then I never saw her again. And then about a year later, I couldn't contact her because her phone was disconnected. And about a year later, she comes walking into the center for a pregnancy test, and she saw me, and she had tears streaming down her face. And I told her to come in my office, and I'm just praying and asking God, I said, please, Lord, I don't want to hear the word abortion out of her mouth. And she sat down, and we talked, and she just broke down. She broke apart. she said, Patty, my grandmother kicked me out, my mom kicked me out, and the only way I could go back home was to have the abortion. She said, I didn't want to have an abortion. She said, I lived with my boyfriend, and he kicked me out. Friends kicked me out. She said, I was living in my car in the dead of winter in Chicago. I was freezing, and she thought the only way I could go home is to have an abortion. So at 6, 7 months, she had an abortion. She aborted her daughter. And I'm telling you guys, she fell on her knees on the floor. She was crying, and I got down on my knees and praying with her. And this woman was broken like I was. And I told her about, our post-abortion recovery program. But I knew at that time she was so raw, she couldn't go through it. She couldn't handle the pain. So we prayed with her, and I talked to her about Jesus, and she said she knew Christ, and she said God is not happy with her. And I said, when Jesus died on the cross, he died for every sin we committed. And she said, Miss Patty, you had 3 abortions. Did he die for those 2? Are you okay? And I said, I'm fine. I said, Jesus died for me too, and our children are in heaven with him. And from that point, I realized that I needed to do something. I asked God to get me out of this ministry. I can't handle it anymore. It's too much. I tell you what, guys, God had more in store for me. He sat me down, and he said, I want you to write your life story down. I'm like, why? I'm no better than anybody else. I'm just a housewife doing what you want me to do. And so for 2 years, I wrote my life story down. I don't call it my story anymore. I call our story. It's Jesus and my story. Because without him, without the foundation, I wouldn't have a story to tell. And so God brought me back to Connecticut for a while, and I was an executive director for a center and the 2 centers there, and did a lot of healing and with a lot of other ladies there. And I realized that since 1973, there have been 60 million babies aborted. And you know what? With those 60 million babies aborted, there's also 60 million men and women hurting from abortion. And when I wrote my life story down, I didn't write it for fame or fortune. I wrote it because I would love to go around the country and open up pregnancy centers and help struggling pregnancy centers that are open financially to stay open. Because that's a battlefield. When they open those doors, that's a huge battlefield.
Yeah. Let me, Pati Adams is our guest. Patty's website is PatiAdams.com. So I've never seen Patty spelled with P-A-T-I.
Yeah, my voice teacher told me a long time ago it was 1 T, 1 I, cover 1 eye,
Yeah, okay, I got you. Anyway, PatiAdams.com if you want to check out her website. Romans 5, verses 3 and 4 is what you quote there on the front of your website. Why are you referencing that biblical verses?
Well, Romans, I wrote that a long time ago. I would like to change it now. I would like to change it to Isaiah 61.
Well, change it. You can change it right now.
Yeah, I'd like to change it.
We'll wait on you. Go ahead and go change it, and then come back and finish the interview. No, I'm just kidding.
I can't change it on the computer now.
I'm just kidding. But why would you change it? Because why?
Because I think where I was then to now is that we're in Isaiah 61. It talks about the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring the good news to the suffering and afflicted. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted, to announce liberty to the captives, to open eyes of the blind. He has sent me to tell those who mourn that the time of God's favor to them has come, and the day of his wrath to their enemies. For all who mourn, he will give beauty for ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of heaviness.
Patty.
Excuse me, I got one more question, Ray. Then we hear all the time, Patty, from people like you, when we do shows like this, programs like this on this topic, how the abortion experience spiritually, emotionally, psychologically had a devastating effect on the women and the men in some cases who participated. Even back to the 1970s, when Roe versus Wade was passed. And this is well before we had the technology we do today, where we all know with this technology, what we're talking about is an unborn baby. We can try to pretend like it isn't, but everybody knows that it is. Now, some people will even argue